Welcome to our latest webinar. Our subject this time is postural challenges for the aging population. My name is Les Jones. Joining me today is
Rebecca Dunstall. Hiya.
Rebecca will introduce herself in a bit more detail and give you a little bit about her background shortly. Format is a mix of PowerPoint and hands-on practical demonstration. Rebecca is just going to load up the PowerPoint presentation. I think that's about it. We're about ready to start. You ready, Rebecca?
Yep.
Yeah. So I'll hand you across to Rebecca and I'll catch up with you in about 20 minutes or so. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Let's just share this screen. There we go. Brilliant. So yeah, I'm Rebecca Dunstall. I'm clinical specialist at KYPHOSIS. I'm a physiotherapist by profession. And what we're going to do, as Les said, is start off with really just the theory behind some of the postural challenges that the older person can experience and how that might impact on posture. And then what we'll do is introduce some of the seating solutions to help address some of those postural challenges. And of course, we'll be sending out the presentation as well with a bit more detail in it, so you can have a copy of the references and so on that we go through shortly. Okay, so just to set the scene, when we say older person, this is a term that can be used to describe an individual aged 65 and over. And there are around 11.9 million older people in the UK. And as we know, with ongoing advances in technology, healthcare and lifestyles, people are living longer than they might have done in years gone by. Now, in 2017, around 18.2% of the UK population were aged 65 and over. So that's about 1 in every 5 people. Now, that proportion is projected to increase by a further 5.8% by 2037, with 1 in every 4 people aged 65 and over. Now, when somebody turns 65, they can expect to spend around half of their remaining life expectancy in good health, which is fantastic. However, the likelihood of experiencing multiple chronic and complex health conditions does increase with age. So as life expectancy increases, sadly, so does the amount of time spent in poor health. Now, an individual who lives with a chronic condition will, of course, have challenges that persist, and they will require ongoing management over a period of years or even decades. An individual who does have multiple chronic conditions will likely have even more complex management needs. Now, of those aged 60 to 64, it is believed that 29% have 2 or more chronic conditions. But as we then go up to age over 75, this rises to almost 50%. Frailty as well becomes more prevalent with age, and this affects around 10% of those over 65. And for those aged 90, it affects 65% of them. The prevalence rate of dementia among older people in the UK is estimated to be 7.1%. So all those health needs, as we said, as we get older, increase risk. There's also evidence that suggests that social care needs increases with age too, whether that's formal or informal care, because of the challenges that they can face as we get older. And it's believed that 1 in 5 men and women aged between 75 and 84 have at least some problems washing or dressing independently. And this then rises to 34% of men and 42% of women once we're 85 and over. So how might this affect posture? So an older person can experience generalized weakness, inactivity and deconditioning with or without an associated illness or disabilities. They don't have to have a specific diagnosis to experience this deconditioning and inactivity. Frailty, which is characterized by a progressive decline in physical, mental and social functions, can significantly exacerbate those problems then. And what we can see is reduced postural control, pelvic instability as gravity takes hold. Gravity then usually traps individuals in destructive postures, exaggerates asymmetries, and we get this loading on tissue that is unequal, often with a slumped, as you can see in the image there, slumped posture, leaning to one side, head lolling forward, and even sliding down the chair. But why is posture so important? Well, those of you who have attended our webinars will know that posture is directly related to a person's health, well-being and quality of life. There are going to be physical, psychological and even emotional effects of body shape distortion. And poor postural care will have severe and life-threatening consequences. We've got a lot of webinars in the past as well. Now that you've registered, you can have access to those past webinars where we go into the clinical reasoning, the clinical justifications for good postural care, and how that might impact on somebody's quality of life. I think we done one at the end of last year, actually, on the holistic approach to postural care as well. So have a look at those past webinars for a bit more detail. So an older person who sits in unsupported and or asymmetric postures can experience pain, fatigue, dependency, poor physiological function, when we go into these in a bit more detail shortly. But this inability to maintain an upright sitting posture, to remain erect and rigid against the effects of gravity, has been associated with a decline in health. And mainly this is seen as problems with physiological function. So they may experience recurrent respiratory infections, digestive problems, and then be at increased risk of hospital admission too. So these are the postural challenges we are going to focus on. Discomfort, fatigue, pelvic instability, and specifically a posterior pelvic tilt, increased thoracic kyphosis, wind sweeping, increased risk of falls, and an increased risk of pressure injury. Now, prolonged and or destructive postures can cause tension on the body segments, which can increase the risk of significant pain. So proper positioning has been shown to be critical in order to promote comfort. If we have supportive sitting postures, individuals who might have a specific diagnosis as well, maybe some neurological involvement with abnormal movement patterns, that supportive sitting posture can be effective in trying to manage it and trying to dampen down some of those movements too. Things like reflexes and tone. It's also really important to feel comfortable and feel safe within the chair, because this is what will actually increase that tolerance of the seating equipment and trying to get compliance with our care plans. Because ultimately, if a user isn't comfortable, if the individual is not comfortable within the chair, then they're just simply not going to use it, regardless of the clinical benefits that we are trying to sell to them. So we really want them to be compliant and consistent with the care plan, and we achieve that by having comfort as our top priority. The next postural challenge we have is fatigue. Now, fatigue can affect all aspects of an individual's life. It can restrict their ability to engage in daily living. It can have a negative impact on psychological and social functions too. And what happens is that an unsupported posture can cause fatigue because we're inefficiently using the body structure. So gravitational forces can make it effortful for individuals who present with muscle weakness and deconditioning and abnormal muscle tones, are some of those things we mentioned the older person could experience. Alongside that, once fatigue takes hold, it can then be associated with significant postural challenges, like some of the things we're going to be going through shortly around the pelvis and around the spine, and then going on to fixed deformities. If we don't manage those postural challenges, then they're going to be at risk of becoming fixed in those postures, and we might get irreversible changes to tissue and bone. Now, independence falls into this fatigue management, because it's really critical that we encourage an individual's well-being. So functional movement is important not only to protect the body structure, but also reducing the risk of injury as well by getting blood flow to the area and getting movement to protect the joints and to protect the muscles and to stay conditioned. If an individual is low on energy, if they become fatigued quickly, then of course function and independence will be extremely difficult for them. It can also play a significant role on their ability to interact and engage as well. If they're fatiguing quickly and they're requesting to go back to bed, being confined to the four walls of their bedroom, limited opportunities for socialising. Now, it's believed that those aged 80 and over are twice as likely to report feelings of loneliness. And those feelings of loneliness have a strong relationship with the low personal well-being ratings. It's actually believed that loneliness and isolation are twice as harmful as obesity is to physical and mental health. So there's quite some staggering facts and figures here to think about when we're working with individuals. And it's not just, I know, coming from a physio, strange, but it's about somebody's physical presentation, but actually that holistic approach as well, and how we engage and participate in daily life. And the chair has to meet those objectives. So if we have a stable foot posture, we can encourage that participation that's so needed, whether that's at home, school, nursing homes, out in the community. We need to introduce that seating system at the right time. So it's got to be in a timely manner. So identifying risk before issues become complex, so that we facilitate psychosocial and cognitive development as well, especially if you're working with individuals who maybe have dementia or intellectual development disorders. If an individual is supported to sit upright, we've obviously got better head positioning because the pelvis will dictate the spine and the position of the head. So we've got a better line of vision for interaction. It provides an opportunity to be able to achieve cognitive tasks, and these are all really important for improved learning and participation. So that's where special seating can really play the role there. It's also really important that, as we said, in a timely manner, we have early implementation of these fatigue management strategies into daily life, because this is what reduces the impact of that fatigue becoming chronic. Energy conservation will make it easier for individuals to live a meaningful life. And alongside that, we then achieve our clinical objectives as well. So let's move on to some of those specific postural challenges then. So a posterior pelvic tilt. Lots of different intrinsic causes as part of the postural assessment that would happen before the seating assessment, as part of a multidisciplinary team, if possible, trying to work out the problem list and what the cause might be, to see if there's any other interventions that might be needed alongside equipment. Things like pelvic instability, there could be limited hip flexion, tight hamstrings, weak abdominal muscles, and fatigue causing that posterior pelvic tilt. And sometimes it can be really critical to know this information before coming along to the seating assessment, so the seating assessors know what types of functions and accessories might be needed. And before I go off tangent again, because I could talk about this for an hour in itself, but we need to know that problem is and what the cause it might be, because there's such a huge range of seating systems and functions and accessories, and there's only so many seating assessors can fit on the van, so we need to narrow it down to make sure we're maximising that appointment. For example, if a limited hip flexion is what is causing the posterior pelvic tilt, then maybe we need to look at chairs with a back angle recline. If it's maybe tight hamstrings that's causing him, then maybe we need to look at the care plan and actually have something like a negative angle leg rest, or making sure that it's clear not to elevate the legs, just as quick examples. A posterior pelvic tilt can be associated with other significant postural challenges as well. So KYPHOSIS that we'll be looking at shortly. What can happen is we get this the cervical spine hyperextension because they're trying to maintain that functional visual field. We can get a tendency to slide forward in the seat, which can increase the risk of pressure injuries because of shear and friction forces, and also then increase pressure going through the apex of the kyphotic spine. And these are all things when we talk about seating and postural care, we need to look at all those body segments. So a kyphosis, when an individual, like you can see in the image there, presents with an increased curvature of the thoracic region of the spine. So the top of the back appears more rounded than normal. An element of kyphosis, because we've all got curves to our spine that are normal. What we're talking about is an excessive curve. What can happen is that we might see a physiological dysfunction with this, just because of the compression and the distortion that could be happening to the organs, depending on how severe that increased thoracic kyphosis is. We can see problems with breathing ability, safe swallow with eating and drinking, digestion, and even cardiac efficiency. This can be associated with a posterior pelvic tilt, like we mentioned, a scoliosis, again, increased risk of pressure injuries through the apex of that curve, and even through the sacrum and the heels because of the posterior pelvic tilt that can happen with it. Head position gets affected as well, the line of vision being towards the floor. So one thing we have to be mindful of with those with the increased thoracic kyphosis is that interaction engagement. So making sure they are able to participate and engage and communicate with others. And this can be especially important, maybe if people have hearing problems, or they rely on lip reading, if they need to be able to maintain eye contact for that communication. So we need to be mindful of that head position. Next, we have wind sweeping. Windswept deformity, very technical term, but what we have is the abduction and external rotation of one hip, and then the adduction and internal rotation of the other hip. However, it is a whole body system postural challenge. We can't just target the lower limbs. We have to have a look how it impacts the spine and the pelvis, of course. It can be associated with the pelvic obliquity, the scoliosis, the pelvic rotation with the spinal rotation, and even a posterior pelvic tilt too. If we don't manage wind sweeping, there can be an increased risk of pressure injury as well, especially in the groin region, and overall postural deterioration. And we can have a look at some of those seated solutions to target that when we look at the chairs. Next, we have falls. So we've said that the older person can experience reduced postural control. They can experience this sitting down the chair or even falling during transfers. We've got an increased risk of falls because of that generalized weakness from immobility deconditioning. Falls can be devastating for the individual, but also for the wider healthcare system as well. I know the human cost includes distress, injury, loss of confidence. They might lose that motivation to want to mobilize. So we get further deconditioning and further weakness, which impacts on their postural control, and then increased morbidity and mortality rates too. Now, by encouraging individuals to stay active, we can not only improve their health, but also their cognition, their confidence, and their mood as well. The specialist seating system has to make sure that the pelvis is stable, the feet are adequately supported to promote that postural stability. So even in sitting, we take 19% of our body weight through our feet. So if you are walking into environment or noticing individuals who are using foot plates as doorstops, bookends on top of wardrobes, then it might be a case just to review that seating system, get the feet supported. We naturally seek that proprioceptive feedback through our feet because it gives us that postural stability throughout the rest of the body segment. We need to enhance feelings of security and physically help keep the individual in the chair as well, keeping the pelvis as far back in the chair as possible, reducing that posterior pelvic tilt, that sacral sitting and sliding down the chair. Now, it's worth mentioning here, Les's favourite term, the devil's in the detail. The chair's only going to be as good as that initial positioning within the chair. So as part of that is making sure that transfers are supported appropriately, that the support network are considered to make sure we reduce that dependency and the effort that might be needed, and to really maximise the transfers into the chair, get that initial positioning right. If possible, photos are one of the best tools you can have in people's care plans, so people can see what we mean by optimum positioning with the chair, and that's the target every time they sit in that chair. And then we have pressure injuries. Again, this is a whole other webinar that we've done, but just in the simplest of terms, posture and pressure are inextricably linked. So the body can only withstand high interface pressures for a very short period of time. And if we don't, if that loading isn't equal, or if that pressure isn't regularly redistributed, then that's when pressure ulcers can happen. And because we're restricting blood flow, the cells are not getting the oxygen and nutrients that they need, so then we get cell death. Now, when they do happen, they can have a profound impact on overall well-being because they're both painful and debilitating. Now, in the older person, if they have a pressure injury, it's actually associated with a 5-fold increase in mortality, which is pretty staggering. Systems, in the simplest of terms, we try and reduce that risk of pressure injury by distributing the individual's body weight evenly throughout the chair over the maximum surface area. So as much of the person in contact with the chair as possible. That opportunity to sit out there can offer a much needed regular change of position to encourage that blood flow that we mentioned and redistribute pressure. So the key factors for pressure care in sitting include optimum positioning. So that's the postural control and the postural support that we mentioned, having a look at all the body segments. Equal weight distribution, the correct chair setup. And again, we've done webinars specifically on correct chair setup and the appropriate use of functions and accessories. So I could go on a tangent again, but I won't go into too much detail. If you want more information on that, we can send the link out. And then, of course, a regular repositioning. So a key intervention is that pressure redistribution, because repositioning is believed to be one of the most effective methods for preventing skin damage. So it's not just about achieving one perfect posture within the chair. We need a regular change of position, either through changing equipment or changing positions throughout the day, or utilising different functions and accessories as well. Things like tilt in space or back angle recline, if it's appropriate and safe for the individual. And then, of course, whenever we're thinking about the older person, there is, as we said, there's increased social care needs. So there might be more dependency on formal or informal care. So we have to make sure at all times that if the support network are heavily involved, that they are also involved in that seating assessment and prescription to make sure that we are meeting their objectives as well. If we are relying on them to use that piece of equipment, then they have to be on board. They have to be competent and confident in using it as well. So the $1 million question, what is good sitting posture? I don't like technically using the word good, because what we're really trying to do is just use as optimum sitting posture. If we're working with individuals who have sadly already developed complex presentations, then it might not necessarily be a good or perfect posture, but for them it's their optimum sitting posture that either accommodates or corrects and reduces the risk of further postural deterioration. This is a really good checklist from Pope, and basically what we're trying to do, as we've already mentioned, is getting the body conformed to the supporting surface as symmetrical as possible. That body weight is distributed equally over a maximum surface area. The body stays balanced and stabilized, but it can still adjust to change. So even if we have to reach outside of our base of support for activities or engagement, we still remain stable within the chair. All those body segments, including the feet and the head, are supported, but also the upper limbs are free from their load-bearing role for function. So we've said how important engagement and function and participation is. We want to make people stable within the chair, because that's when they'll feel comfortable utilising their upper limbs. What we might find if they're feeling insecure in the chair or unstable, they'll be clinging onto the arms or digging elbows into the corners of the chair. We want them to be able to have that stability of the pelvis and the trunk to be able to engage the upper limbs in function and activities. So just as a visual, so you can see the difference. This is the lady we saw earlier, and what we're aiming to achieve is a more upright position and symmetrical. The head in line, opening up the shoulder girdles, because we want to encourage that physiological function, breathing ability, especially because of the risk of infections that can happen as we get older from immobility and deconditioning. What we want to do is encourage physiological function, getting the feet supported, the chair measurement set up for the individual, and reducing the risk of pressure injury. So in summary, what we're aiming to achieve with specialist seating when we're working with the older person is comfort. So those feelings of safety and security should be the main objective, and it's the main objective here at KYPHOSIS, because if an individual isn't comfortable, then they're simply not going to use the chair regardless of those clinical benefits. We need postural support, so we need stability at all those body segments, because we need to protect them. We need social interaction, physiological function, to make sure we protect the health and well-being. Energy management, and we can use specialist seating as an intervention for energy management, utilising things like tilt in space and back angle recline, where appropriate, to recuperate for a period of time before coming back upright to engage in activities. We want to encourage functional independence, so it's got to be compatible with the older person's functional movement, with the mobility levels, their mode of transferring, and making sure that's safe for them. Interaction and engagement, of course, to be able to participate with the loved ones, with their environment. Safety, mobility and falls prevention, and then pressure care. So getting as much of the person in contact with the chair as possible, using integrated pressure relieving systems and redistributing systems like water cell technology, which Les can go through shortly, to again think of this holistic approach to specialist seating rather than just one perfect postural presentation. And what we're aiming is optimum health, well-being and quality of life for the individual. So what I thought we could do is introduce Tom. So we can really apply some of that theory to a person and have a look at the seating solutions. So Tom is an 81-year-old gentleman who resides in a nursing home. He has a diagnosis of vascular dementia, presents with frailty. He's now non-ambulance, so is hoisted for all transfers. He's unable to change position independently, both from the deconditioning and the weakness, but also cognitively as well, not knowing that he needs to change position, needing prompts to do that, but the weakness and the frailty is restricting our ability. And because of all these challenges, recurrent pressure injuries and respiratory infections, so there's an increased risk there of hospital admission as well. So as postural challenges on assessment, so before the seating assessment takes place, these postural challenge list would be highlighted to make sure that we can maximise the seating assessment with the right chair and functions and accessories. But fatigue, because of that generalised weakness, pelvic instability, so a posterior pelvic tilt, which has then resulted in an increased thoracic kyphosis. Have impaired physiological function, which is evident by the recurrent infections that he's experiencing, and then that increased risk of ill health and hospital admission. So keep those postural challenges in mind, and what we'll do now is apply that to some of the seating solutions, so you can see how we can help manage that for the older person. There we go, we should be back on screen.
Okay, so what I thought I would do is just run through the pathway we would have taken to provide the correct seating for Tom. First thing I'll do is just quickly run through chairs we considered and discounted and the reasons for that. Now, my remit for Tom, as Rebecca's already said, is comfort. I want to be providing a solution that's as supportive as possible. I'm looking at a holistic seating assessment here. I'm looking at the environment that Tom was living within as well. I'm looking for something that's as least restrictive, but still being supportive, as least complex as we can hopefully achieve. So if I just quickly run through a chair, we could have gone for the Smart Seat Pro, very complex, multi-adjustable chair. Not really suitable for Tom. He didn't really need the level of postural support and adjustability that the chair provides. Plus, the environment that Tom was in needed a less complex solution to make it more effective in the day-to-day use of the chair. Yeah,
so we heavily relied on that support network. So we wanted the care plan to be as easily as followed as possible, especially in a nursing home environment where there might have been a high turnover of staff.
Yeah. And if you need more detail on that chair, you go to the website. There's details on all the chairs, and we provide you with information on the case study as well. The other chair we considered was the Hydro Tilt, tilt and space chair. Very simple, very effective, very comfortable chair. Comfort was a key issue. We needed something a little bit more complex. So it's a little bit like the Three Bears here, okay? A little bit too hot, a little bit too cold. Just right. So that leads me to the chair in the middle of the view there. It's the multi-adjust. All the chairs have a common feature, and that's tilt and space. That's going to help with Tom's fatigue. Yeah, we'll encourage staff to tilt the chair back whenever Tom isn't perhaps needing it in an upright position for meal times, for digestion. Tom's going to fall off to sleep. We just want to tilt that chair back, provide the most energy efficient way for Tom to sit in that chair. Tilt in space, I'm sure we all know, but it's the seat to back angle remains constant. It maintains pelvic stability. What this chair had that the Hydro Tilt didn't have, though, was back angle recline. We needed just a touch of back angle recline. And coming back to my holistic seating assessment, we needed to make this thing as user-friendly for the carer perspective as possible. So if I just bring the chair to the screen just to show you what we've done. So tilt in space, right-hand side, squeeze the lever, release it wherever was most appropriate for Tom.
So it doesn't affect those critical angles for sitting, so especially with his pelvic instability as well. It could be used throughout the day.
So that angle remains
Yeah.
constant.
And it could be used throughout the day without having much of an impact, as Les said, posture neutral, and can be used by the care team throughout the day to manage energy levels. Whereas, as Les showed you, back angle recline does impact on the hip range of movement, which is great because we did need to accommodate that slightly. But what Les is going to show you now is how we limit the use of that, because we only want it set for Tom and then not really utilised.
So what we've done here is to provide an additional lock feature on the lever. So tilt, just squeeze and adjust and release to lock the position. With back angle recline, if I just, it's locked, I need to release this lever here. Yeah. Adjust, and you'll hear it just lock back into place. Lock that off, because we really want to be careful of how we use back angle recline, Tom. We don't want to use it inadvertently. We have been known on certain assessments to actually set the back angle, remove the lever, then just giving the chair that tilt in space. Carers just need to concentrate on that transfer into the chair to achieve the best posture for Tom and tilt in space to help him sit in a more energy efficient way.
Yeah. If that back angle recline was used inadvertently outside of the care plan, then we'd just see that sacral sitting worse. We'd see the risk of him sliding down the chair, increased shear and friction forces as well, impacting on his pressure, or his already pressure injury risk because of immobility.
We can adjust the seat width and the seat depth. Again, if you need to see that in a bit more detail, we can show you on a website. Very simple to achieve. Just levers, a little locking mechanism just on the inside of the chair here. The back.
As we said, it's really critical that every single chair is set up for the individual user. Seat depth, seat width, seat height, armrest height, because that is what will impact on the postural stability. If the seat depth is too long for an individual, then they might actually have to slide forward in the chair just to get their feet onto the foot plate because they can't bend their knee over the edge. If the seat width is too wide, then we can see lots of pelvic rotation because we naturally seek that support in the chair. So we could be encouraging that rotation and increasing the risk of those postural challenges as well. So we have to get the chair dimensions, and that's really basics that sometimes is overlooked. But that's where tool-free, really good for multi-use environments.
So you can see I can adjust that there. I can adjust the arm height as well. Or I could take that away as well.
Especially for hoisting, so for the likes of Tom, making sure that we can use it as a guide when take the armrest away to see whether we actually are getting the pelvis back in the chair as far as possible during hoisting. Tilt in space can sometimes help with that as well, because gravity will pull the pelvis down and reduce that carer effort. So you can really see the positioning within the chair.
Can you just show the effect of a seat depth that's too long? Because it's probably the most common thing that you'll see. In a care home setting is that seat, that chair that's got a really long seat depth.
Kind of like the high back armchairs, if somebody doesn't have a special seating system in place and they are just using those generic armchairs, where you can't change those settings and you've got a 6'2" gentleman and then a 5'2" lady both using the same chair. So it's not hard for me, but if you imagine seat depth too long, I can't bend my legs, I can't get my feet on the foot plate. I don't have any postural challenges or damage to the body systems. Just get my feet on the foot plate because we naturally seek that support. I've got to go into a posterior pelvic tilt. So I created this postural challenge that can actually be quite significant on well-being, on trunk positioning, on physiological function and pressure injuries as well. So it's really key to get that seat depth and seat width right.
So as you can see, I'm going to leave the arm off because it gives us a better picture of what's happening. I've got my chair fitted with adjustable laterals. Possibly the most effective way to provide a kind of really precise lateral support. But comfort was my big box to tick for Tom because we wanted compliance, we wanted to be comfortable in the chair. We wanted to see him wanting to sit in the chair. The laterals were just a little bit uncomfortable. We could adjust them, we could move them up or down, in or out. just didn't quite work for Tom. Just didn't find it comfortable, a little bit agitated.
Yeah, and he also needed a wider support surface as well, just because of the nature of his frailty and the weakness. What we might have seen is a heavy lean happening and actually just hooking over that lateral support anyway. So we needed a wider support surface, which is something like what the contoured back can give you with the comfort.
Just so I'm going to show you the flexibility of the chair. So we swapped out the flat back. Just popped on contoured back. Before I fit that to the chair, I just want to show you something else that we considered. Consider the waterfall back as well.
Yeah, this could be really good for us. So, he's got this increased thoracic kyphosis. A waterfall back can be really beneficial for that, because you can actually remove some of that wadding in that thoracic section to accommodate a thoracic, so you can encompass then the apex of that curve to redistribute pressure. But because of Tom's frailty and his weakness and his fatigue, it just didn't offer enough lateral support for him.
That's just it. That's always the danger with the waterfall back, is it's really, really comfortable for the person sitting in the chair, and the initial response is very positive because they find it very comfortable, but over time they will just roll off to one side or the other. So we went for another word we use a lot of in specialist sitting, the compromise.
Yeah.
And that compromise was a contoured back. You can see the shape there. Now what that was doing, does do, is prompt Tom to sit in that midline position.
So when he does have the energy to sit upright, prompt him, but still encouraging some active engagement as well to try and protect those body segments.
Have a little bit of adjustment in this, because you can't quite make that out there, but when it's in that position, the contour is slightly higher on either side.
So better for a taller individual.
I swap that around, it's slightly lower. You can't really make that out on the camera there, but it's quite a helpful feature to have.
Just make sure that you can position those pads in the right place along the trunk.
I'm just going to pop the arm back on.
So the contoured back was really good for Tom, but then what we needed, because we still had that increased thoracic kyphosis that was somewhat correctable, but we need to accommodate it as well, is looking at head supports to be able to fill in that gap. So we couldn't bring Tom all the way back to the chair, so we could bring the chair to Tom with a profiled headrest to fill in the gap.
Yeah, and I think again for pelvic stability and sometimes for safety, we needed to think about pelvic straps and groin harnesses. So just a standard padded pelvic strap, it sits across the hips, provides that little bit of pelvic support, or a groin harness. Don't use this very often, but it's quite a useful tool to have in the kit, where you have that person who tends to slide forward, perhaps a lot of career movement. It's quite a helpful component to use. Client sits, and that locks back there to hold that person in place.
Yeah. So least restrictive option, starting with maybe utilising tilt in space for that pelvic stability. We could work our way up to ramped cushions or contoured cushions, and then working our way up then. So with the least restrictive, working our way up to the most restrictive, up to then positioning aids. Now, positioning aids, belts and harnesses do come with a device safety alert. Again, we've done a webinar specifically on the safe use of those, if you wanted a link to that, because I know we're just glazing over right now, but it's got to be risk assessed and prescribed responsibly. But when used for positioning purposes and for safety, sometimes it can be critical to keeping that pelvis in the back of the chair and reducing the risk of falls as well. So that's something to consider.
So moving up through the chair, Tom had a kyphosis. Another chair we could consider from this, and Jess will post a link for you to have a look at the chair, is a chair called the Hydroflex. The advantage the Hydroflex has is that the top section, this section here, this is the multi-adjust, but on the Hydroflex, it articulates, a section moves forward.
So when I said about not being able to bring Tom to the chair, bringing the chair to Tom, the Hydroflex, if somebody did have an extreme thoracic kyphosis, you can actually bring the top section of the chair to Tom. But because because we're thinking about safe use and compliance with care plans and not trying to overcomplicate things, and this is where I mentioned about the head support, we can use that to fill in the gap instead then.
It's, yeah, in essence, you know, what we try to do is to correct, if it's possible to correct somebody, but we needed to take the support surfaces out to Tom. We couldn't get him back in the chair because of his fixed posture. The solution we came to, though, was to use the soft profile headrest. This can be used in one of a couple of ways. So we can then use it just on the shoulders there. So as I fall off, it just cradles my head. Always quite useful for Tom was just to drop that down, and that was kind of helping to provide support for that kyphosis.
One thing that can be actually beneficial for increased thoracic kyphosis, if somebody's quite fixed in that position, some individuals don't tolerate tilt in space, or tilt in space isn't safe or appropriate for them. What you might see some individuals fighting against that impact of gravity, so that switching gravity, you might see them fighting against it. So sometimes an anterior force and anterior support can be quite beneficial. So we mentioned about straps, things like chest harnesses, if somebody's already got a pelvic belt, but actually something as simple as a tray with some support on top of the tray, a V cushion or a padded tray to give that anterior support can sometimes just help prompt to open up the shoulder girdle as well, and a tray could be fitted to the multi-adjust.
Yeah, I was thinking laterally sometimes, because, you know, we think of a tray just for function, but it can be quite helpful for posture as well, to open up the shoulder girdle. Pressure care. The chairs come with pressure care as standard. It's called water cell technology, and perhaps if I ask Jess to post another link for you here, it's a combination of a 4-way stretch breathable fabric that covers the chairs, the black fabric you see on the chairs I have, again the grey on the SmartSeat Pro 2. 4-way stretch, what that allows the bony prominence to be absorbed into the surface of the cushion. It's a combination of memory foam, which heats and conforms to the body shape, and 3 water cells in the base, and the water just displaces. So where you have a high pressure point, it's absorbed into the seat surface, surrounding pressure rises and spreads the pressure over a greater area. But we're always keen to point out that that just forms one component of the pressure care system, and that system is getting the correct seat width, the correct seat depth, the correct use of the chair. When I say use of the chair, that's my little cliche, devil's in the detail, is the setup of the chair and the initial training and advice we provide to carers when they've got to use that chair. Because again, coming to compliance, this wasn't an issue for Tom, but if that person doesn't really want to sit out for whatever reason, if the first time they use that chair it doesn't really work and it's because we're not using the components correctly, it's a big backward step. So that initial setup is really, really important.
And we're also on hand with the review process as well. So even if a chair is working well for a period of time and then needs change, maybe there's a progressive decline in function, especially in the older person, sadly, some of those abilities can tend to decline further. There may be changes in weight. Then please do get in touch because we're involved in our review process as well. It's not just the delivery.
Yeah. I mean, the adjustability of the chair isn't just for that one point in time for that person sitting in the chair. It's, if we get the assessment process right, it's to mirror the progression of the condition or age or decline, so that you get the most out of the chair. It's future-proofing the product. Right, if we just talk, we'd be coming to the end of the little presentation here now on powered options for the chair. This wasn't really applicable for Tom because of the cognitive issues he had with his dementia. On this chair, it's a manual tilt, manual back angle recline, manual leg rest operation. We can motorize each of those functions. So that would be tilt, leg rest, and back angle recline. But we are always a little bit wary about recommending back angle recline to be powered. Because if you think of it, the type of person sitting in this chair doesn't have the ability to reposition themselves if they open up the back angle on the chair.
Yeah, do you want to just demonstrate
Yeah.
that? You can see how even with the contour, so lateral support, external lateral support is actually even worse than this because of the positioning. But if you just notice on the contour with tilt in space, that contour at the trunk stays in the same place because as we said, is posture neutral. Wherever we are in that position, we still support the trunk.
Tilt there.
Yeah.
Not affecting the pelvis. Make you seasick now. So back angle recline. I'm just going to open up the angle of the chair.
You can see those contours.
And you can see that's just lifting Rebecca's arm.
And now they're up under the armpit, under the axilla, instead of on the trunk where they should be. Now, as Les said, the type of individual, the older person thinking about frailty, what we're not going to be able to do is reposition, especially in Tom. I can't reposition myself, so all I'm going to get is just this squashing and crunching. It's so uncomfortable. Indeed, now these laterals are not in the right place. Ideally, we want who can reposition, get the pelvis back in the chair, and again, the contours go into the right place. So just be mindful of back angle recline. I think that's one thing we can't stress enough. If it's not indicated, making it clear in the Clare pan, locking it off, hiding the waist, setting it at the prescription, and then leaving it if that person can't reposition themselves, or if there's not a support team that understands the risks involved with back angle recline.
Right. So that feature with us to power tilt, powered leg rest, but manual back angle recline is called Pro Control. Maybe an advantage for some people is that we can integrate the chairs into environmental control systems. So if your client is using an eye gaze type system or an electronic system to operate features around the home, the chairs can be brought into that system as well. So if they wanted to use tilt, leg rest, they could do that through that environmental control system.
And that's really then maximising their independence. So what we want to do is obviously keep people in their homes as long as possible, reduce the need for people to go into residential, into care homes, admitted to hospital. So if we can encourage that independence within the home, then yeah, keep them thinking about that function.
An additional feature we could consider on the Hydra Tilt and the Hydra Flex is called Auto Tilt, which is a regulated motion, and that will provide movement, the tilt in space movement, over a programmed period of time. It just adjusts, I think it's half a degree. Yeah. Again, if you go to the website, you'll find more details on this. It adjusts half a degree at a time.
Yeah, and what that can do is, again, thinking about cost effectiveness, because it's not just about the individual, of course, they're at the centre and the support network, but actually making sure that we're using resources responsibly, being cost effective. There is a limited availability with funding, sadly, so we have to utilise that. And sometimes something like the auto tilt can actually work out significantly cheaper than somebody needed 4 care calls a day at home to be able to change their position.
So that's Tom. So our solution is the multi-adjust, but we did consider the Hydra Flex as well. So we are, for once, running on time.
Yeah, time for some questions.
Give us an opportunity to take some questions. Jess, have you got anything to throw at us?
Yes, so we have a question on, they'd like to know if we have any seating with negative angle for the knees.
Yes, we do.
We didn't actually mention it because Tom actually didn't have necessarily any problems with them.
We focused on Tom, and Tom didn't need negative angle, but all the chairs have a 25-degree negative angle leg rested, plus the foot plate compensate. The foot plate will bring to slightly raised position to give you that foot support as well. But now you've mentioned that, you can be a nice little segue into one of the features that we can provide, or one of the services that we can provide, and that's called tailored solutions. So we do, everything you've seen with us today is off the shelf. It's a component that we build the chairs with. But we see a number of people who are fairly unique in the way that they present, and they require some kind of tailored bespoke component on a product.
They might have more than a 25-degree limitation.
We talk, if we talk about contractors, we talk about people with, perhaps 45 degrees, if that's the angle there. So, and in that position, if you imagine,
to have to get the feet right under there.
If that's me, I'm accommodating in this compromise we're not going to correct. I need to find a way to get that person's legs underneath the sitting posture. And we can do that with what we call a swinging leg rest. So we just take the leg rest away and we provide, it's almost like a child's swing, if you can imagine that in a park, of 2 straps or 4 straps at the front of his hands, so that it allows us to push right back in underneath the seat base of the chair.
Without that, all we'll see is a safe sitting because obviously the hamstrings are attached to both joints. If we don't accommodate that knee range of movement, it'll just pull. For example, if Tom did have contractures of the knees, it just would have pulled him down into a more of a posterior pelvic tilt. So we have to accommodate the knees so we can get the pelvis and the hips in the right position.
There's a compromise solution, but where, you know, part of our initial remit, if you like, as we establish before the assessment begins, is I think Rebecca mentioned it, is, you know, well-being and socialization. You know, you get people being cared for in bed because they don't have a safe seating solution. So the compromise situation is to accommodate that person and get that person out into the lounge or to the activity room.
So I think that's all of our questions for today.
Okay. Well, if anyone thinks of anything at any point, anyway, when you get all the post-course information and this and presentation, and be contact details on there. So if there's any clinical queries or any seating assessment queries in general, then just if you think of anything, just let us know. Yeah.
If you need more detail on any of the chairs, website. If you need to check out how I've adjusted some of the chairs, again, the website. It's a great resource. Just pop along. If you've got a query, you can use the chat feature there to speak to Jess, and she can point you in the right direction. So that's all from us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and we look forward to meeting up with you again sometime. Thank you.
Thank you.